Hello and welcome this evening. I am the California Association of the Deaf's president, hosting our fourth webinar and welcoming you all tonight. Before we start our program, I'd like to give a visual description. Behind me, the background is black. I have dark hair, short hair. I do have earrings and a necklace that are silver. I'm wearing glasses. I have on a blue jean denim jacket. And I have a black blouse on under. I am wearing lipstick. I have rings on either hand. And I'm extremely excited to be here with you all tonight. Looking forward to summer. School is over and graduations are really close by. I'd like to cover some housekeeping before we get started. As you watch the presentation tonight, the presentation should take about 20 to 30 minutes. If you're in YouTube or Facebook, type in a question if you may have a question that applies and is relevant to the topic tonight. If the question is inappropriate or is using slanderous or foul language or not relevant to the subject, we will not take that question. We will most likely block it and ignore your question if it is one of those. Second, as you watch the presentation tonight and you do have a question, please ask your question. We have myself and Michelle Botte, along with Marla Harper, who will be taking the questions and forwarding them to our presenter, Kay, this evening. I'd like to introduce Marla Hattrack, our facilitator for tonight. Marla, please come on the screen. This is Marla speaking. Good evening, folks. I am Marla Hattrack. I will also give a visual description. I have brownish hair. I'm wearing glasses. I have silver earrings and a necklace, a gray shirt, and a brown cardigan. The background behind me has a map on one side. The map is of Peking, China. And on the other side of me is a bookshelf with a couple pictures of my family. I'd like to introduce my sister, Kay Vincent. Kay's presentation this evening was also presented in 2018, and I've asked her to return to give us this presentation once more because it was just a very informative presentation. Kay was a caregiver for my mother for 14 years. For example, Kay allowed me to realize that Medicare covers in-home support services. I reached out to a doctor to put these services in place, and the doctor asked me if my service provider was licensed. I was looking for a deaf caregiver, and I realized, we need to encourage members of the deaf community to become caregivers. However, I don't want to take the floor, and so at this point, I'll pass things over to Kay Vincent. And Kay, I'm a senior citizen now. I better watch this presentation so I can learn what it is I need to prepare myself for. Thank you. This is Kay speaking. Thank you, Marla. And thank you to the California Association of the Deaf for providing me this platform to share my thoughts and experiences. Before we get going, I really want to clarify that although I took care of my mother for 14 years and I was her caregiver, one might think that my experience was common, and perhaps it is to some, and perhaps not to others. I do believe that each experience is unique in nature. So, today's title for tonight's presentation is, Now That I'm a Senior Citizen? Now what? What do I do? And so we're going to talk about that tonight, about becoming a senior citizen. And also, I want to shift your attention on the process of becoming a senior citizen. Of course, when one becomes a senior citizen, one has common thoughts. Am I old? Am I going to be sick all the time? It's a fact of life. It's a cycle of life. Life has birth, growth, wisdom, aging, and death. And there's no way to avoid the process of life. Quite often, people have thoughts of being sick when they become older. Some people worry about becoming older. Other people imagine that they put in place plans and wishes for themselves as an older person, and that they can live a life where they're living, doing what they'd like to do as an older person. So let me check in and ask you, do you know what you want to do when you're older? Are you familiar with resources that you may need in the future, or do you know how to get them? Many times we don't have these conversations or prepare ourselves in advance. It almost seems like talking about being old is taboo. Of course, I'll agree, it's not a friendly topic at all to discuss. However, it's a fact of life that we need to talk about and prepare for. In tonight's presentation, I will focus more on preparation, on being prepared. Why is it critical for us to prepare for when we're old? Number one, again, it's a fact. We are all mortal. Eventually, we will all die. The question is about how, when, and where. That's the unknown. We know that we shall pass at some point, but those three items I mentioned are the items that we don't know. So we want to be prepared for that ultimate moment. People quite often retire, become old, they're in their 60s, maybe they retire at 55, maybe 65, and they imagine that they'll travel during retirement, that they'll have more time to spend with their partner, that they'll be able to work on their projects, or that they'll check off items on their bucket list. And I wish that things went that way during our senior citizen years, that we were able to live according to our dreams. So let me ask you, do you have a wish list? Do you have a bucket list? And if you do, what's on it? What happens if you age and become incapacitated at some point? Have you prepared for that? Those usually aren't items that people put into their bucket list. However, I suggest you consider incorporating those types of items into your bucket list, which really is more of a checklist of what you want for yourself in your life, what it is you want to do. Add that to your vacation, travel, time with grandchildren, time with your partner. Include those points that I just mentioned to these items. It's the end of your life, and we call that end of life preparation. If you're prepared, then you can tell people what you'd like, what you want, and what you don't want. If you should happen to pass, then people would already be aware because you've already prepared what types of plans you want for your end of life. This way, if you do pass, you can pass being rest assured that your cycle of life is going to turn the way you'd like it to. What I'm saying is there are specific items after the end of your life that you can specify. If you fall sick, what type of care would you like? You also get to lay that out. Also, what do you want people to do with your body, your remains, your items, your things, your belongings, your legacy? and so on and so on. Because if you prepare ahead of time, you can leave those important items to those that you'd like, and your loved ones would really appreciate that you were prepared. What does it really mean to prepare for end of life? I have a couple items on the slide. You need to start thinking, if you haven't already, as your time nears, what are your wishes? What do you want? What do I want? I know a lot of people say things like, oh, I wish I would die instantly and I wouldn't even notice. And there are other people that say, no, 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 I want time to say goodbye. I want to hug folks, give them kisses, and say goodbye. So think to yourself about that. What are your end of life wishes? Be prepared. Create a living will, a will, or a trust. There are so many decisions that you have to make about what you want. And I ask you, have you thought about it? It's part of the process of preparing for end of life. You'll also want to consider your funeral planning in advance. Do you want a memorial? Would you rather be cremated? What exactly do you want? And then, do you have the money for it? Are you expecting others to cover those plans? Again, more planning and more decisions to have to make. Also, complete a medical directive. Almost every hospital, doctor, or provider asks for a medical directive, which indicates if you get older, do you want to be sustained on a machine and kept alive, or do you not want that? Your desires are going to depend on what gets filled into that medical directive and what type of life supports you would like when you are near end of life. So get some of those medical directive forms. There's paperwork to it. Fill that out, enter the information so that your medical providers and your family will know your desires and your wishes. Moving on, you want to organize your finances. If you have money, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to give it away? Is someone going to take care of it? Let me ask you something else. If you fall ill and sick, do you have a power of attorney planned out with someone? These are things to figure out. Let's talk about your memories, your digital life. Maybe you have photo books, albums, all that can be converted into digital format so that people can continue to enjoy photographs, pictures, albums, and such. And once you've made your plan, you can lock it in, but you can also revisit that plan and change parts to it because life changes. Life changes on a daily basis. So, really, there's times where you need to revisit your plan. That can never hurt. I would encourage folks to have conversations about and revisit your plans. And then a final recommendation is to think about it, but you need to share it. The information that you put together is useless if you don't tell your family, your partners about it, so that they know and are familiar with what you want, your desires, and your wishes for when you reach the end of your life. Also, if you're not sure if something is available or not, or what options are available or not, if you're not familiar with those items, then it's time to figure out what resources exist, what your rights are, and if there are any legal issues connected to your desires. As Marla mentioned, our own mother had specific ideas as to what she wanted. We complied with her wishes, and it ended up that everyone felt good and were at peace when my mother passed and reached her end of life. And I hate that she had to go, but we feel good because at least we were at peace because we knew her exact desires and wishes and how she'd prefer things to be. So that's the big part of it. If you've already taken care of these items, great. If you haven't, I suggest you start thinking about it and start making these tough decisions. They certainly are not easy decisions to make. And it's important to feel like you've looked into things thoroughly before making those decisions. Also, have conversations with your family about it as well. If you or your parents, well, let me back up. I want to also mention that this is information for senior citizens, but really, this information applies to everyone because the truth is, eventually, we will all die. We will all perish. Maybe we'll die when we're 30, maybe 40, maybe 50, maybe even 100. What's critical here again is to be prepared for your end of life. Young people listening to this might be thinking, that's not an issue for me. I don't need to worry about that. But let me ask you about your parents. Do you know exactly what your parents want to do at their end of life? Have you had these conversations with your parents? I would say that perhaps different generations would react to this conversation about end of life differently. Nowadays, it seems people are slightly more open minded, but then there are also religious or cultural inhibitions. Sometimes even politics or philosophies get in the way of having these conversations. However, it is important to ask, and if the person you ask doesn't want to talk about it, maybe you can check in until the time is right and they feel ready to talk about it. Okay? There's a lot of parts to end of life preparation. Let's talk about just some legal responsibilities: a will, a trust, estate planning, probate. What is probate? Do you have documents ready in case you pass where legal responsibilities are outlined? Or do you not have that yet? Those are legal documents that everyone should have in place. You can change those legal documents. You can set them up when you're 40, and then when you're 50, if you have extra children or grandchildren, you can include them in your planning documents. But it's important that you have these documents prepared and ready. If you need help with planning these documents, I recommend you visit an attorney or a lawyer. You can also save money by thinking ahead and laying out these items that I just mentioned. If you know what you want before you speak to an attorney's office, then you could have that, be better prepared to have that conversation. Attorneys and lawyers charge by the hour, so you want to be as prepared as possible because it can be expensive. But at the same time, you could save money, but it is not cheap. Or if you have relatives that could help you with the documentation, it's still critical that they become legal documents. If you've got that in place, great. Then I would recommend to communicate that information with your loved ones, relatives, friends. Let people know. Let those who you think should know about your wishes and plans know. Let them know what your will indicates. Some families used to say that they don't discuss wills until someone passes, then they read the will. And sometimes they're surprised when that happens. But we can always not be surprised by just being prepared. If you're single without children and no partner, then what are your plans? These are things we have to think about too. You can't just imagine that since you've got no family or no relatives that you don't need a will or that you don't need estate planning. That is not the case. You can put some thought into donating to charity, an organization. There are a variety of options that you can do with your plans. Again, back to what's being critical is that those need to be documented and share that with your friends so that your friends know what you'd want to do. Sometimes people do die instantly, unexpectedly, a heart attack, or even at a young age. And family and relatives are often left wondering what to do. Maybe they will have a discussion. Maybe it'll turn into a fight. Maybe it'll be easy for them to agree and make decisions together. But you want folks to make those decisions based on your values, not what on somebody else wants, not on someone else's terms. So that's a thought. So it's important to have your legal documentation in place. Here's another challenging area, and this area is always challenging: financial responsibility. Let's say you're retired, you've got a 401k, if you got some money there, you've got life insurance, maybe you have long term care insurance, and so on and so on. Are you prepared? Are you really prepared? Statistics show as of 2021 that a person will spend from $156,000 to up to $1 million for their medical costs. Of course, we're not expecting to be sick at all times or to suddenly be sick, but healthcare does have its cost. And that could deplete your retirement. What would you do in that case? We have to figure that out. Are you prepared? You need to think about it. Definitely something to think about. This might influence how you make your budget and what items you budget, and you could see if it's financially possible or not. Long-term care or homes are very expensive nowadays. And as deaf people, we want to stay close to the deaf community. Where are those types of long term care supports? Sometimes they're far away, sometimes they're at a distance. And more people prefer to have in home services, prefer to be cared with live in services. Those types of services cost money. So, by having some financial responsibility and setting that money aside, you can afford to pay for that type of private care. And then there's communication needs when it comes to your care for yourself or for your parents too. These are conversations that you need to have with folks. If you have financial issues or if it's not an issue for you financially, you need to prepare these items in your will. It really just takes some thought. I challenge you all to ask yourself these difficult questions. I know it's not a simple thing to do. I know it's not. This ties into choices. If you fall ill and you're still able, do you want to be taken care of in home? Or would you rather live in a group home? Would you prefer to live in an assisted living environment or a nursing home? There's a plethora of choices, and you have to make a decision which you prefer. And when it's time, do you know where to go for help? Do you know who can support you? The questions on this slide often make people wonder and feel like maybe they're not ready. They're not ready to face reality. If someone asks, "Do you have a caregiver?" the response might be, "No, I can still take care of myself. I'm fine." But we can never anticipate what's going to happen or what's around the corner. Maybe we live alone. Maybe we do have a caregiver. Maybe the caregiver can be a variety. Maybe you can have a live-in caregiver, or you can have a day caregiver that comes once or twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day, just to help with items like cooking and feeding, maybe even play some games with you, visit you, take you to doctor's appointments, take you grocery shopping. There are there's a lot that caregivers do, and the responsibilities for caregivers always widen to cover quite a bit. And then there's another question: do you have children? Do they need to be cared for? And on and on and on. Are you on medicines? Are you taking medication? In that case, you need a nurse or a licensed professional to be able to support you with those medicines or medications. You need to have conversations with your doctor about this. You need to look into your options and understand what they are. So I've mentioned all these items, and now I'll bring up your property, your clothes, your valuables, pictures, furniture, items of sentimental value, things that have been handed down by family over the years, maybe even a pet. Do you have a dog? Who's going to watch your dog? There's just so much to think about. You have to think about your assets. I'm sure there are things you have that are valuable and then others that aren't. And then again, those items of sentimental value that you really care about. What do you do with all that? Do you give it away? Do you have a plan for how you're going to handle these items? Again, I recommend you think about this. Next slide. Okay, now we're on the slide that talks about legacy. What is legacy? Quite often, people imagine legacy to mean you've got some money that you are going to contribute to have a hospital or a center built in your name. And people imagine that to be your legacy because it creates a memory of you by having your name on a medical center, a hospital, a park, and so on. That's one form of legacy, but legacy isn't limited to just those types of examples. Legacy can be something that you as a person are passionate about, something that you've dedicated your life to, something that you've always cared for, something that you've always advocated for. Some people advocate for deaf youth, some people advocate for animals, some people advocate for national forests and parks. So, when talking about your legacy can be an action that uses some of these items mentioned, and it's not limited to just financial orientation. Your legacy is a way for people to remember your work, your efforts, your passions, your achievements that you achieved during your life. You do want people to remember you, but what do you want people to remember about you? Do you have plans? Do you have wishes? Do you know someone who knows what you want to do? Let's say, for example, I would like to donate my money. And true, I am a big supporter of deaf history, and I would like to establish a deaf museum or set up a deaf museum. So I would like to donate my funds to a deaf museum. And that's the type of item we want to communicate and let others know that we'd like to do. And it's more about what you want people to remember you by. This slide says on it, ways to go. Yeah. What can I say? Again, it's a fact of life. We are all going to go someday. Remember, how, when, and where is what we don't know. However, we still have options. If you should pass, How do you want to be handled? Do you prefer to be physically buried, cremated, or donated to some type of organization? Do you have plans? Do you want to have a funeral service? Would you prefer a memorial or a celebration of life? Do you know of any other choices? Do you have information and contingency plans ready? Have you communicated with people so that they know what you want done with your body, with your remains? It's not the easiest topic to have a conversation about or to discuss with anyone, and because when we ask these types of questions, the first thought is, do you want me to leave this earth already? The response is no, I want to be able to comply with your wishes. People don't often think about planning for this. People don't realize I'm going to go one of these days. Again, a very difficult topic to discuss. But after taking care of my mom, taking care of my husband, and seeing other people that I've cared for, I've realized it is critical to talk about these subjects, to be comfortable when having the conversations, and to embrace the fact of life. It's just the process in the cycle of life. It doesn't mean we're looking forward to this part of life. It just means that we matter of factly plan to help other people be better prepared at the time of our passing. My point here is maybe you have planned this out and thought about it. Maybe you haven't. I recommend you start thinking about making plans. You might not like thinking about this subject. You might realize then what your desires are and what you don't desire for your end of life. It's very important to become familiar with your choices. Each state has different laws. You want to be familiar with those. I'm in California, where a new law was passed where you can end your life if you qualify. You should be familiar with that law. In Oregon and another state, you can have a medically facilitated passing. They can help you to go. But that's not the case anymore. It used to be Oregon and two states. The most recent update is that 15 states now support end of life decisions. If you don't want to have to be sustained via life support or machines, if you don't want to survive via feeding tubes, or if there are some sort of breathing issues and so on. Some people, like for example, with heart conditions, heart transplants, liver transplants, can still live on another several years. That definitely is a possibility now. And those don't always have to become end of life issues. Quality of life is critical, though. You do want to have a quality of life that you're used to. Perhaps now, if you're older, you're sick, you're laid out in a bed constantly, you aren't able to enjoy a quality of life. You aren't able to enjoy an income. So it's time with your wishes, your preferences are, and also looking into whether your desires are possible or not. Because because it's not a one day chore to do. This is planning that can take the course over several months or even a year. And it really depends on what it is you want to do for your end of life. Last slide here, very important. Bullet point is talk and communicate your wishes with your loved ones so that they know your desires. And then not only that, of course, we're deaf. Maybe our parents were hearing. Maybe they made decisions and didn't communicate those with us. Maybe we were left out. Are you okay with that? Can you check in with your siblings to see if they are aware of your parents' plans? Sometimes they are, and they feel like as a deaf sibling, they'll take care of it for you and just leave you out of it. Some siblings are good about that and they'll include you, and some aren't. They'll just leave you out. But you can be involved in making those decisions. I hear that I've heard plenty of horror stories about how deaf individuals, quite often deaf with hearing families or deaf with hearing parents, are just left out from the decision making process. It's very unfortunate and very sad. So, how can we prevent that from happening? You need to bring up these topics and have these conversations. Ask your parents, ask your siblings, what do I need to know about your end of life wishes? I want to have a conversation about it. Ask those questions. So, like I said earlier, I've had my experience being a caregiver, and I don't really wish for anyone to have to go through those moments. Now, my experiences were pretty good. They were optimum, they weren't horrific. I really enjoyed being my mother's caregiver, but it's not easy. There are other people with Alzheimer's, dementia, where communication becomes a real problem. So it can be extremely challenging. We can't anticipate for that part of life. We can't always foresee that either. So that's the reason for the presentation tonight is to put this ball in your court and ask you to have these thoughts and conversations with your siblings, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner, your husband, your wife, your children. It's time to talk about what does end of life mean? Also, what does being a senior citizen mean? It means we slow down, we're not as active. Health sometimes diminishes and deteriorates, and our recovery time slows down. There's just so much to being a senior citizen. And quite often, our children don't realize it. So it's important to have these conversations with them and just talk about it. And while you're doing that, make plans if you feel ready and comfortable to do so. Thank you. At this point, I'm open to questions. I might not even have answers for them, but I'll do what I can for you. Marla speaking. What a really nice presentation. Kay, you touched on a sensitive topic with a really soft and tender heart. I enjoyed your approach. Really nice. I can say I remember when I married and met my father in law. He was ready to change the will. And he told me, he said, people that don't plan for their death are very irresponsible. And that was a really tough thing to say, but you said it in such a kinder way. My father in law was very direct, and I can see how that would allow family to be at ease when those agreements and plans are already put in place ahead of time. Okay, Kay, we do have a list of questions for you. First question, I think, is a rather easy one. First question says, who would you suggest we contact in regards to setting up a power of attorney or that type of paperwork? Case speaking. Really, in general, it can be any. Well, I shouldn't say any. It's not going to be a criminal attorney or a finance attorney, although perhaps it is a finance attorney. The better words for it are an estate planning lawyer. An attorney who specializes in estate planning would be a good choice. Of course, you've got to do the filtering and screening yourself and make your own selection. What about a living trust and will? Is there anyone out there who is deaf that is knowledgeable on developing them? Do you know if there's a deaf estate lawyer? This is Kay speaking. Not that I know of, but I'm sure that there are some deaf who are more, well, deaf people that work at law firms might be more familiar with that and can make a referral, but I don't know of anyone. Let me also say your own CPA, your financial planner, those individuals quite often will have a referral. They'll know someone. If they're a deaf CPA, maybe they'll know someone deaf, but they can refer you to someone that could help a bit when it comes to financial planning. When it comes to a will, more often, wills are about money specifically and what you plan on doing with your assets, what you plan on doing with your house and your money. That'll be laid out in a will typically. So, a financial estate planner or a financial person can definitely be the one who helps with that. This is Marla speaking. Well, thank you, Kay. What a great idea. Moving on to the next question. How do you suggest what would be the proper way of asking parents what their wishes are? Is there a right way to ask them? What do you wish for, mom and dad? Kay speaking. That is tough. It's a tough thing to do, but I think it comes down to timing. The timing is key. You got to figure out when it's important. Maybe you watching a movie with your parents, and that's when you bring it up. Maybe the subject comes up in the movie. Maybe a character passes or dies, and maybe you can say something like, "Whoa, what a horrible way to go. How do you feel about it? How would you feel about, or how do you feel about death?" And then kind of segue into the conversation that way. Maybe by asking, you might not get a response. If you don't get a response, you should back off and wait for another opportunity to bring it up again. If you see a situation happen, if you read an article in the paper or something in the news that allows you to bring it up with your parents, that's one way to approach it, where you can have more of a discussion about it and not so much an interview where you're interrogating them about their wishes. That could lead to that, but for me, it was an easy decision. I've told my relatives that I want to be cremated. And I remember telling my mom that, and she was a little shocked. She said, cremation's an awful way to go. And quite often, we would talk about it, and I realized, boy, that's true. They got to take your body. But then, why save the body? When with cremation, it's something different. And so my mom changed her thinking on it over time, which is why I said you've got to revisit your legal documents and planning documents because we change over time. Marla speaking, agreed. The next question is, I know that CAD has a senior task force that needs more committee involvement. So should that committee reach out to Medicare or Medi-Cal and ask them to provide them a presentation, an IHSS presentation, which is in-home support services? The question continues on to say, why not give training for the deaf to work as IHSS providers? That will definitely help the California economy and employment. What do you think, Kay? Kay responding, definitely yes. Yes. CAD, California Association of the Deaf, does have a senior citizen task force who is working on what to do with deaf senior citizens in California and what they want. However, there's a whole range of wishes. Some deaf people want to be with other deaf people. Some deaf people would rather be with their children. Some deaf people don't care if there's no one else deaf in their town. And those are some of the struggles that the task force is having when it comes to serving the California population of senior citizens. Some items can be easily resolved, like what you mentioned. Medicaid, Medicare covers some items, but it is best to have a long-term care insurance in place. Long-term care insurance will cover private living services. Medi-Cal program has you use their people. And so that goes back to the question if you want to hire someone yourself, that's IHSS, or should we have a Medicare presenter that can come present to people, to deaf people who want jobs or are interested in caregiving careers, because they can actually start from there, definitely. I know of a few deaf individuals who work as IHSS caregivers, and they support their community of people that are disabled, sometimes personal, sometimes for others. I know that there are several, and they're just not vocal about it, right? They're quite often, a caregiver is a private issue, it's not something public, right? It's also a HIPAA issue. So people often don't disclose that they do caregiving, but I know some people that have the experience and some that are currently still caregivers. But a good place to start would be for CAD to invite them so that they can talk about how they got into those careers. Yeah. This is Marla. I'm curious, do you know how long it takes to train to get an IHSS license or certification? What is it? Case speaking, it depends. Like I said before, caregiver can be a person who just drives you to your grocery shopping. They don't need a license for that. But people who send caregivers, those agencies usually require them to be licensed because they have an insurance and are bonded, although it's not necessary. But a in-home caregiver should have CPR training and a couple other basic trainings. So it really depends on the experiences. Uh, a person could take a 6-month training period. They could have several certifications, one in CPR, another in home-based care services like bathing and so on. And they could be licensed in the medical area, which is more like a nurse. That type of license would require a 1 to 2 year program to get a certificate and the license. But yourself as a caregiver get to define the services that you provide, what you're willing to do when you visit someone, you can define. Other people prefer only certain duties like bathing and so on. Some people prefer medical. Again, it's different by preference. Marla speaking. Okay, I see. Kay, thank you so much for a very informative presentation. Do you recommend that senior citizens sign up for their preferred type of living care and living plans ahead of time? For example, they might need to be on a waiting list. Do you recommend that? This is Kay, for sure. This is Marla. People can get on waiting lists, right, for living care situations? Kay speaking. Especially, well, if it's an in-home where you want to stay, you don't need to sign up for a waiting list. But if you want to move to a nursing home or an assisted living, you're definitely going to want to sign up, and you're going to want to visit. You should visit as many locations as possible to see if you like the place, if they have signing staff or not, do they have physical therapy or not, do they have activities or not, or are you just in a room? And if you are in a room, what's your room look like? Is the room going to fit your preference? Is it deaf friendly? Is it not deaf friendly? Do they have signing staff? Do they not have signing staff? Can your children visit? That's another question. If you have a pet, can you keep your pet? There are so many things to consider. which is why you should visit as many living care locations as possible. Just like you would a college to see if you like the dorm, to see if you like the college. It's the same idea. It won't hurt to sign up to a location that you like. Doesn't hurt at all, definitely. But it's important to visit as many as possible. I'd say that's very important. This is Marla. Agreed. I think that's it for tonight. I don't see any other questions. Let me double check our list of questions just to make sure. Nope. I did have one more question. It slipped my mind and I didn't put it on our list. But Kay, you've done a great job. Any last minute questions? Any more last minute questions? We're checking our social media channels. Facebook, YouTube, we're checking just in case. I've been told we have thumbs up. Kay, an excellent job. I think you were so thorough and filled in all the details. You answered people's questions before they could ask them. Good job. This is Kay. One more thing I'd like to add. There are national, there might even be international, but I know there's a national organization called Certificate of Senior Advisors or Coalition of Senior Advisors. That organization certifies, trains, and certifies senior advisors in different areas like finance, healthcare, medicine, living arrangements, probate, advocacy, and different states have chapters. You can take those exams and become certified, almost kind of like becoming an attorney. These are specialized for senior citizens because they have unique issues. It's a very interesting and fascinating organization. So if you're interested in pursuing this further, the information on that organization exists and is out there. I can also share a website. This is Marla Wright. So if people are interested in becoming senior citizen advisors, they can do so. And then kind of like what your presentation is today, right? You can become that type of advisor. This is Kay Wright. I became that type of advisor. You don't have to be an attorney or a lawyer to have these certificates. I took those trainings and learned how to do those, work in those different areas. That organization also has a convention, an annual convention, and it's almost just like an attorney or a doctor has to take their bar exam and renew it. It's the same thing. We have to do the same thing with this organization. I think they have a meeting tonight. No, a meeting this summer in Indianapolis. Oh, wow, says Marla. Do you know of DSA, Deaf Senior Citizen? No. Deaf Seniors Association of America, says Kay. Yeah. Do you know if they discuss the same items we discussed tonight? Do they cover those areas? This is Kay. I really have no idea, although I do doubt it. Maybe, I'm sure it comes up, but I doubt it's an organized effort or a coordinated effort. Not that I know of. I do know a couple. Right, you're right. Some states, it varies by state. Some states have very active senior citizen advocacy service groups. And then a couple folks are isolated. I think if it started, we could probably unite at DSA. I think it's a good idea. Right, says Marla. DSA said that was the original reason they were put in place. But then they were also a part of NAD, and somehow it steered away into more of a social organization with conferences versus a legal organization. They have workshops and information at their conferences. I don't know how much in depth they get into these areas. Everyone that presents things in different ways with different perspectives and different lenses. This is Marla Kay. I think you need to present a workshop at the DSA. I think they need you there. I'll think about that. This is Kay. And Marla, what a beautiful, magnificent job. I look forward to tomorrow. I wish you happiness all, because some parents might be upset saying, where are all these weird questions coming from? Why are you asking me about my end of life? We know it's a scenario that can take either direction. But again, thank you so much for presenting on this topic to us tonight. Marla speaking still. Before we close tonight, I would like to make an announcement. CADS ASL celebration on September 28th and CADS statewide conference on September 29th to October 1st will be happening. So please save the date and keep your eye open for an announcement that we will be releasing soon. Thank you for that.